The number on my phone screen didn't make sense at first. I blinked twice, refreshed the banking app, and stared at the balance again. $0.00. My savings account, the one I'd spent 3 years building, was completely empty. I stood in my parents' kitchen with my phone trembling in my hand, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The morning sunlight streaming through the window suddenly felt too bright, too cheerful for what I was seeing. My father sat at the kitchen table reading his newspaper like it was any other Tuesday morning. My mother hummed while washing dishes at the sink. Neither of them looked at me, but I could feel the tension in the room like static electricity before a storm. Something was very wrong, and somehow I knew they were behind it. The casual way they moved, the deliberate way they avoided eye contact, it all screamed guilt. "Where's my money?" I asked, my voice coming out sharper than I intended. My father finally looked up from his newspaper, his expression completely calm. "Come." My mother turned off the water and dried her hands slowly, deliberately, before turning to face me. The casual way they moved made my stomach twist into knots. "We transferred it," my father said simply, folding his newspaper and setting it aside with precise movements. "To our account. This morning." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "You what?" My mother crossed her arms, her chin lifting slightly in that way she did when she thought she was right about something. "We moved your money to teach you a lesson, Alyssa," she said, her tone matter-of-fact, as if she'd just told me she'd reorganized the pantry or rearranged the living room furniture. I stared at them, waiting for someone to laugh, to tell me this was some kind of joke. But my father's face remained stern, and my mother actually looked proud of herself. "A lesson," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. My father sighed heavily, like I was being difficult on purpose, like I was a stubborn child refusing to understand something simple. "You've been getting too independent lately. Too comfortable. We thought you needed a reminder that you're still part of this family. Still under our roof, still our daughter." The words hit me like physical blows. My mother nodded in agreement, her expression self-righteous. "You've been making decisions without consulting us. Staying out late. Acting like you don't need us anymore. That stops now." I looked down at my phone again, at that devastating 0, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. That wasn't just money. That was 3 years of my life, stolen in a single transaction. My name is Alyssa Montgomery, and until that moment I'd thought I had everything figured out. I was 28 years old, working as a medical billing specialist at County General Hospital. I'd moved back in with my parents 18 months earlier to save money for a down payment on my own place. It was supposed to be temporary, just long enough to build a solid financial cushion and maybe save enough for furniture too. My parents had seemed supportive at first, even encouraging. "Save your money," my father had said repeatedly. "Build your future. We're proud of you for being so responsible." I trusted them completely. I'd been open about my finances, even shared my excitement when I hit savings milestones. They'd celebrated with me, or at least I'd thought they were celebrating. Now I realized they'd just been watching, calculating, waiting for the right moment to strike and teach me whatever twisted lesson they thought I needed. That savings account wasn't just numbers on a screen. It represented every overtime shift I'd picked up, every lunch I'd packed instead of buying, every concert and vacation I'd said no to. I'd been disciplined, focused, determined. I'd deposited money every single paycheck without fail, treating savings like a bill that had to be paid first. The balance had grown slowly but steadily. $10,000, then 15, then 20. I'd been so close to my goal of $30,000 for a down payment. $28,417. I could picture that number perfectly because I'd checked it obsessively, proud of what I'd accomplished through pure determination and sacrifice. Every single dollar had a memory attached to it. Late nights at the hospital processing insurance claims. Missed birthday parties because I was working. Saying no to friends who wanted to go out for dinner or drinks. And now it was gone, taken by the 2 people I'd trusted most in the world. "You had no right," I said, my voice shaking with anger I was struggling to control. My father's expression hardened into something cold and distant. "We have every right. You're living under our roof, eating our food, using our electricity and water. My house, my rules, Alyssa. You know that." The familiar phrase made me feel small and powerless, like I was 12 years old again instead of a grown woman with a career and responsibilities. "You'll get it back when you've learned some respect," my mother added, her tone suggesting this was somehow generous of them, like they were doing me a favor. "When you remember that family comes first, before your selfish plans to move out and abandon us." I opened my mouth to argue, to point out how twisted their logic was, then closed it. Nothing I said would matter right now. They'd made up their minds, convinced themselves they were doing the right thing, the responsible parental thing. I forced myself to nod once, a small movement that made my mother smile with satisfaction. They thought I was agreeing with them, accepting their authority. They were wrong. My older brother Tyler wasn't there that morning. He never was when our parents did something cruel or manipulative. Tyler, the golden child who could do no wrong, who'd lived rent-free in their basement until he was 32 years old. They'd never touched his money, never taught him any lessons about respect or family or gratitude. When he'd finally moved out 2 years ago, they'd given him $5,000 as a housewarming gift and helped him move his furniture in their truck. The double standard burned in my chest, but I'd learned long ago that pointing it out only made things worse. Tyler got understanding and support and endless second chances. I got control and punishment and impossible standards. The unfairness of it had shaped my entire childhood, and apparently it was still shaping my adult life. I swallowed that bitter truth and kept my face neutral, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing how deeply this cut, how completely they'd betrayed me. I went upstairs to my childhood bedroom without another word, my legs feeling heavy with each step. The room still had the same pale blue walls I'd painted in high school, the same bookshelf filled with old textbooks and novels I'd read years ago. I closed the door quietly, sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my phone. The zero balance seemed to mock me, taunting me with everything I'd lost. I didn't cry, though my eyes burned with the effort of holding back tears. I didn't yell or throw things or punch the wall like I wanted to. I just sat there in the silence, feeling the weight of betrayal settle over me like a heavy blanket I couldn't shake off. My parents had stolen from me. Not borrowed, not asked, stolen. And they felt justified doing it, felt righteous and correct. That realization changed something fundamental in how I saw them, in how I saw my place in this family, in how I understood my entire childhood. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying years of conversations in my mind. All those times they'd called me responsible, low maintenance, Izzy, the reliable daughter who never caused problems or asked for much. I'd been proud of those labels once, had worked hard to earn them and live up to them. Now I understood what they really meant. I was easy to control, easy to manipulate, easy to steal from because I wouldn't fight back. They knew I wouldn't make a scene, wouldn't fight back loudly, wouldn't risk damaging the family relationship that I valued so much. They'd been counting on my compliance, my desperate need for their approval, my fear of disappointing them. And they'd been right. For years and years they'd been right. But something had broken tonight, something that couldn't be fixed with apologies or returned money or explanations. The trust was gone, and in its place was something cold and calculating I barely recognized in myself. The next morning I went to work like normal. I smiled at my coworkers, processed insurance claims with my usual efficiency, answered phone calls from confused patients with billing questions. During my lunch break, I didn't go to the cafeteria where I usually ate. Instead, I drove to First National Bank across town, a different bank than the one I'd used before, a place my parents had no connection to. I opened a new savings account with the $50 I had in my wallet, all the cash I had left to my name. The bank representative, a friendly woman named Patricia with kind eyes, helped me set up online access and mobile deposit. She explained the account features thoroughly, completely unaware of why I needed this fresh start. Then I called my employer's payroll department and changed my direct deposit information. My entire paycheck would now go to an account my parents didn't know existed, Couldn't access, couldn't touch. When I returned to work, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd taken the first real step toward freedom. My parents assumed I was broken, defeated, compliant again. They assumed I wouldn't question their authority or look for ways around their control. But they'd forgotten something important. They'd raised me to be smart and resourceful. They'd taught me to solve problems and think critically, to be independent and capable. Those skills didn't disappear just because I was angry or hurt. Over the next week, I quietly gathered every financial document I could find in my room. I downloaded 3 years of bank statements from my old account before they could think to restrict my access. I printed transaction records showing every deposit I'd made and the single massive withdrawal my parents had authorized without my knowledge or consent. I organized everything into a folder on my laptop, backed up to the cloud and an external drive. I wasn't sure yet what I'd do with this information, but I knew documentation was important. Evidence mattered. Facts would protect me. That Friday evening, I sat through the most uncomfortable family dinner of my life. Tyler had come over for his weekly visit, and my parents were in excellent spirits. My father joked about managing my money better than I could, laughing at his own humor. My mother smiled and patted his hand, like he'd done something clever and praiseworthy instead of something cruel. Tyler laughed along, oblivious to the cruelty of it all. Or maybe not oblivious. Maybe just indifferent because it didn't affect him, didn't threaten his position as the favorite child. I ate my pot roast quietly, pushing peas around my plate mechanically, forcing myself to smile at appropriate moments. Inside, I was counting the days until I could leave, planning my escape. Let them enjoy their victory. Let them think they'd won, that they'd successfully put me in my place. Their smugness would make what came next so much sweeter. I was learning that sometimes the best response to injustice wasn't confrontation but patience and strategy. On Monday morning, exactly 9 days after discovering my empty account, a white envelope arrived in the mail. I was getting ready for work when I heard the mail truck outside. Its familiar rumble on our quiet street. I reached the mailbox before my mother did, sorting through the usual collection of bills and advertisements and grocery store flyers. The official-looking envelope caught my attention immediately. Thick paper, printed return address, my name typed on the front in formal letters. I opened it in my car before leaving for work, my hands shaking slightly with anticipation and hope. The letter was from the Federal Banking Commission's Consumer Protection Division. It was dry and boring, full of legal language and official terminology that required careful reading. I read it twice, and by the end my hands weren't shaking anymore. I was smiling. Everything was about to change, and my parents had no idea what was coming. The letter stated that an irregularity had been flagged in my account at Riverside Community Bank. Because my parents had made a large withdrawal from an account solely in my name without proper authorization, the transaction was under review for potential banking fraud. I was requested to verify whether I had authorized the transfer or if it had been made without my consent. The letter provided a case number and a deadline for my response. 14 business days. I sat in my car for a long moment, feeling something settle into place like puzzle pieces finally forming a complete picture. I hadn't filed this complaint. I hadn't contacted any federal agency or made any formal report. But I knew exactly what had happened. Banks were required by law to flag certain types of transactions, especially large withdrawals from accounts belonging to adults. Someone at Riverside must have noticed the unusual activity and filed a mandatory report. The system had caught them automatically. I responded to the letter that same evening, sitting at my laptop in a coffee shop across town where my parents wouldn't see what I was doing or ask questions. I wrote calmly and factually, sticking to objective truth without emotional language. Yes, I confirmed, the withdrawal had been made without my authorization or consent. No, I had not given my parents permission to access my account or transfer funds. I attached copies of my bank statements showing the pattern of my regular deposits and the single unauthorized withdrawal that had emptied my account. I explained that I was an adult account holder and that my parents had accessed my account using information they'd obtained while I lived in their home. I didn't embellish or exaggerate. I didn't add emotional appeals or describe how their actions had hurt me. I didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves clearly and powerfully. I submitted the response through the Commission's secure portal and closed my laptop. Now I just had to wait and let the process unfold. For the next 2 weeks, nothing happened on the surface. My parents grew more confident with each passing day, more comfortable with their theft. My mother started talking about using my money to renovate their bathroom, discussing tile colors and fixture options. My father mentioned he might buy a new riding lawn mower, something he'd wanted for years. They spoke about it casually at dinner, like they were spending their own money instead of something they'd stolen from their daughter. Tyler listened without objection, occasionally offering suggestions about bathroom tile options or lawn mower brands. I continued eating quietly, nodding when expected to, keeping my expression neutral and unreadable. Inside, I was counting down the days, waiting for the inevitable. I knew how these government processes worked. They were slow but thorough and relentless. The wheels of bureaucracy turned at their own pace, but they did turn. Eventually, consequences would arrive in an official envelope. The second letter came on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after I'd sent my response. I was at work when my mother called my cell phone, something she rarely did during business hours. "Alyssa, you need to come home immediately," she said, her voice tight with stress and barely controlled panic. "Your father and I received some very serious mail today, and we need to discuss it as a family right now." I told her I'd be home after my shift ended at 5 o'clock. She protested loudly, insisting I leave work immediately, but I held firm. I wasn't going to drop everything and rush home on command, not anymore. Those days were over. When I finally pulled into the driveway that evening, I found both my parents sitting at the kitchen table with a torn envelope between them. My father's hands were shaking slightly as he held the letter. My mother's face was pale, all color drained from her cheeks. They finally looked worried, genuinely scared, and I felt nothing but cold satisfaction wash over me. The letter from the Federal Banking Commission was 3 pages long. I read it carefully while my parents watched me, their expressions moving from worry to panic to desperation. The document outlined the investigation into the unauthorized transaction. It stated that because I was an adult account holder and had not consented to the withdrawal, the transaction violated federal banking regulations. Riverside Community Bank had been ordered to freeze my parents' accounts pending the investigation's completion. The letter requested my parents provide documentation proving they had authorization to access my account within 10 business days. It mentioned potential penalties including fines up to $50,000 and possible criminal charges for banking fraud if they couldn't prove authorization. The language was formal and bureaucratic, but the message was clear. My parents were in serious legal trouble. My mother's hand covered her mouth. My father stared at the letter like it might disappear if he looked long enough. "Alyssa, you have to fix this," my father said, and I noticed he said it as a command, not a request. There was no apology in his voice, no acknowledgement of what they'd done wrong or how they'd hurt me. Just expectation that I would make their problem disappear, that I would protect them. My mother nodded urgently, her eyes wide and frightened. "Call them tomorrow and explain that this was just a family misunderstanding. Tell them you gave us permission, that we talked about it." I looked at both of them, these people who'd raised me, who were supposed to protect me and support me. "I didn't give you permission," I said quietly but firmly. "You took my money without asking. You emptied my account to punish me. That's called theft, even when family does it." My father's face flushed red with anger. "After everything we've done for you, after we let you live here, eat our food, this is how you repay us." My mother stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound. "You did this deliberately. You reported us to punish us for disciplining you, for trying to teach you respect." I shook my head slowly. "I didn't report anything. The bank did. They have to when someone makes a large, unauthorized withdrawal from another adult's account. It's federal law. They don't have a choice." That was technically true. I hadn't been the one to trigger the initial investigation, though my response had certainly confirmed their suspicions. My father slammed his hand on the table, making the letter jump. You could have told them it was authorized. You chose not to. You chose to betray your own family, your own blood. The word betrayal hung in the air between us, heavy with accusation. I let the silence stretch for a long moment before responding. Who took whose money without permission? I asked softly. Who betrayed whom first? Neither of them had an answer for that. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. That night I packed my belongings. Not dramatically, not in anger, just methodically and completely. I filled cardboard boxes with clothes, books, personal items I'd accumulated over 28 years in this house. I worked quietly, and my parents didn't try to stop me or convince me to stay. My mother watched from the hallway for a few minutes, then disappeared into her bedroom without saying anything. My father stayed downstairs, and I could hear the television playing some late-night news program. By midnight, everything that mattered to me was packed into boxes. I carried them to my car in multiple trips, loading the trunk and back seat until there was barely room to see out the rear window. I left my house key on the kitchen counter with no note, no explanation, no goodbye. I'd already said everything that needed saying. At 28 years old, I was finally leaving my childhood home, and it felt nothing like I'd imagined it would when I was younger, dreaming of independence. I stayed with my coworker Bridget for the first week, sleeping on her couch and trying to figure out my next move. Through mutual friends and the inevitable small-town gossip network, I heard updates about my parents' situation. Their bank accounts remained frozen while the investigation continued its slow process. They'd hired a lawyer, which was expensive and eating into their savings. My mother had called Tyler crying, begging him to talk sense into me, but he'd been surprisingly unsympathetic, apparently losing. Money made people reevaluate family loyalty quickly. My father had tried to withdraw money from his retirement account to cover their immediate expenses and discovered the freeze extended to all their accounts at Riverside Bank. They were living on credit cards and the cash they had on hand. The stress was showing in obvious ways. According to Bridget's mother, who knew my mother from church, both my parents looked exhausted and strained. I felt no satisfaction in their suffering, but I felt no guilt either. 3 months after moving out, I signed the lease on a small one-bedroom apartment across town. It wasn't fancy, just a ground-floor unit in an older building with thin walls and outdated appliances. But it was mine. My name on the lease, my furniture, my rules, my space. I'd rebuilt my savings to $4,000 by living carefully and working extra shifts whenever they were available. It wasn't the $28,000 I'd lost, but it was progress toward rebuilding what had been taken. I bought a used couch from a thrift store and hung curtains I'd found on sale at a discount store. I cooked simple meals in my tiny kitchen and slept better than I had in years. My apartment was small and humble, nothing impressive or Instagram-worthy. But walking through the door each evening felt like freedom. No one could take this from me. No one could punish me for becoming independent or making my own choices. This space was entirely, completely mine. My parents tried to contact me multiple times during those months. Texts at first, asking me to call them urgently. Then longer messages explaining they'd only been trying to help me, to teach me important lessons about family and respect and gratitude. My mother left voicemails that alternated between anger and guilt-tripping, sometimes within the same message. My father sent emails with the subject line, "We need to talk," that I deleted without reading. Tyler called once, trying to mediate and bring the family back together, but he'd always been their son first and my brother second. I didn't respond to any of them. Some people might call that cruel or immature, but I called it self-preservation. I'd learned that closure wasn't something you owed to people who'd broken your trust so completely. Forgiveness wasn't mandatory, and reconciliation wasn't required just because we shared DNA. I focused on building my new life instead of repairing a relationship that had been broken long before they'd touched my bank account. 6 months after leaving, I heard through Tyler that the investigation had finally concluded. My parents had been required to return the full amount they'd taken, plus penalties and legal fees that nearly doubled the total cost. The bank had permanently flagged their accounts for suspicious activity, which would affect their ability to get loans or open new accounts. They'd avoided criminal charges but only because they'd returned the money and I hadn't pushed for prosecution. They were furious with me, Tyler reported, and didn't understand why I wouldn't just forgive and forget, why I couldn't let bygones be bygones. I listened to his summary and felt nothing but a distant sense of completion. They'd wanted to teach me a lesson about respect and family and their authority over my life. What they'd actually taught me was that authority without integrity always collapses eventually. That consequences are real, even for parents. That sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't revenge but simply allowing the truth to speak for itself. I didn't take revenge on them. I just stopped protecting them from the results of their own choices. And that, I'd learned, was enough.